Yes. Do you have the latest SKU?
Yes, we do.
SKU. I was wondering. Oh,
Yes.
what are these? I've never seen that
Top
before.
secret.
Remember round in the corner to see a whole wall of new toys at the drugstore or the old mall? Roll call, this is for all of those y'all who knew the half but just had to know it all. Reading backs of packs and needing backpacks. Well, you're in luck, Jack. These are the facts. Snap on, stay on, accessories, play sets, stuff you haven't heard anybody say yet. From the pre-pro, prototypes, histories, marketing, mailaways, mysteries, misfires, missile launchers, battleships. Hold on with a swivel arm battle grip. You have to get intel from those who know things and kept it all together like O-rings. Behind the scenes, R&D doing the art. Blueprints that got you glued to the card under the bubbles. Yeah, that's where the action is. All the reasons that you opened up the packages and played with it till you broke its leg. You never forget when you saw it on the peg. What really went on beyond the toy aisles? It's all right here in the toy files. Right here in the toy files.
Welcome to the next episode of the Toy Files. I'm your host, Dan Klingensmith, and with me again as my co-host is Mr. Kirk Mazigian. Kirk?
Hi, guys. Welcome back.
Yes, welcome back. Tonight, I'm excited to have our next guest, Mr. David Kunitz, former VP of Design of Boys Toys at Hasbro. Dave, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for being with us. So before we get started, we just want to talk to you a little bit about your time before you actually started working at Hasbro and other companies that you've worked for over the years, and just really learn about your experience in the toy industry overall. And, you know, this whole conversation is meant to be casual, not really formal, so don't worry about anything in that manner. So first off, I just wanted to learn a little bit about you and what drew you to design. Was this something that you always had hoped to be part of? Or what's kind of the history behind Dave Kunitz and being an industrial designer?
Sure. I didn't know anything about industrial design actually as I went through high school. I didn't go straight to college. I worked in roofing. I did a lot of industrial jobs. I then ended up in a machine shop and realized that the guys that were doing the designing of the parts, sending it down to my machine shop, I wanted to be that, I thought. Did a little research and found out about industrial design. Went to Purdue University, and what I really wanted to do is not toys. I wanted to do small desktop computers because those were becoming hot. Imagine that. And that's really what I concentrated on, I had thought, but really every project I did was very toyetic, very playful. And when I got out of school, ran into a guy that had graduated 2 years before me from Purdue, where I went, and he was in toys. And he said, "You should come down and do toys." And I said, "No." Then the headhunter I was working with said, "Have you done much interviewing?" And I said, "No, I haven't done much." And she said, "Well, are you interested in toys?" I said, "No." And she said, "Well, for a test interview, you should go down to Hasbro and, you know, just see how you do, because you don't want to go to your favorite job as your first interview." Went to Hasbro, had a blast, an amazing interview, just fun, and then didn't hear from them for 3 months. I figured they didn't want me. I got 2 job offers 3 months later. It took a while to get jobs were tough at that point. 2 job offers, same day. Point of purchase displays or computers, just what I had wanted to do. And I called up my dad and said, "Hey, which should I do?" And he goes, "Well," I said, "one pays more, the point of purchase, and the other one's just what I was talking about doing, you know, forever." And he said, "Well, what was the best interview?" And jokingly, I said, "Well, Hasbro." And he said, "Well, what happened with that?" And I go, "They didn't call me." He goes, "They didn't call you?" I said, "No, they didn't call me." He says, "Call them. What's the worst that could happen?" And I said, "Dad, come on, they don't want me." He says, "What's the worst that could happen? Call them. You already don't have the job." I said, okay. So I called Hasbro, talked to design. They said, oh, we loved you. You were great, but we had a hiring freeze the day after you were interviewed. I go, oh, okay. Got off the phone, called my dad, said, hey, which of the 2 jobs should I take? And he goes, who'd you talk to? I said, design. He goes, you had to talk to HR. I'm not calling back to HR. And he goes, yeah, you are. So I called back to HR and they said, funny thing you called. A day ago, our hiring freeze ended and not all the people we thought were going to come from this other company came. I said, well, design loved me and they want me, and get the paperwork going and I'll have them come over and sign it. And they go, well, that's not really the way it works. I goes, no, it'll be fine. Just get the paperwork going. I'll have them come over and they'll sign it. So I called up design and said, hey, the paperwork's all set. All you have to do is sign it and I'm in. And they go, oh, well, that's not how we usually find out about it, but okay. And I got an offer that afternoon.
That's funny.
That's how I ended up at Hasbro. So it really was my first job out of college.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That's an amazing story, Dave, because I'd never heard that story about your past. And you know, it was you went on to become like one of our top designers. I mean, that's just incredible.
And it was a blast every step of the way. I mean, it was the perfect job. I mean, you go in, you play for a living. How bad is that?
Yeah, I always thought the same thing. I always had people say to me, boy, you must have the best job in the world. And, you know, that brings us to, I guess, one of our first questions is, you know, what's it like to work at a toy company?
Well, like I said, it's a blast. There is, you know, I don't want to put it out of perspective. There's a lot of pain that goes through it all as well. A lot of deadlines, working towards things that, or on projects you may not want to work on, but you have to, you know, really perform for it. It's a job. So yes, there are some bad parts, but it's a toy company. So it's still a blast.
So how bad can it be? Because it's a toy company.
Exactly. And the people that are involved in toys are planning on having fun as well. So you're working with people that are playful. And so in work, out of work, those are the people that I hung with. Ended up marrying somebody from Hasbro. So, you know, really hung with that person. And she's back at Hasbro working full time as well. Well,
that's
she's
great.
At home working full time as well, I should say.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Be sure to say hi to her.
Do you recall who your hiring manager was, or who interviewed you?
Yeah, Steve Reese was part of it, but Wayne Luther, I think, was the person that I had to have sign the documents.
Awesome. So, I mean, you've moved through several positions over the years. You know, can you talk a little bit about your career progression and the different roles that you've held? You know, whether it be at Hasbro, or I know you've gone to other toy companies as well since.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, I started at Hasbro. Well, I mean, the real career started back in the machine shop, I would say, but yes, started at Hasbro, you know, sort of a junior designer-ish kind of thing. You're always thrown these little projects to start. First projects I worked on were Transformers. It was, I'm going to date myself, it was 1984. Transformers was just coming out. They weren't really sure how well it was going to do. Turned out a pretty good toy. But I got to work on that, and I got to design some to send over to Japan to be worked on, as well as most of the time it was colorways, because we were using a lot of their tooling and trying to create a design language of good and bad. So we set a design color palette for the good guys and a design color palette for the bad guys, and we really tried to stick to that. And that's the way that we really created Transformers as a product line. We translated that, or we used that a lot in G.I. Joe as well. Mm-hmm. I'll talk about design language, I'm sure, a bunch later. But yeah, junior designer, I got to do all sorts of cool stuff. At the time, many of them I don't love, but are good enough, I guess. And they were little ones. Gosh, what is it? I don't even know. The
Transformers, you mean?
Low crawl vehicle, the sled, what is it, the water sled? Give me a name.
For the G.I. Joe, you mean?
Yeah, G.I. Joe.
Oh, the Hydro-Sled? The little...
Hydro-Sled, good.
Okay.
Soon after that, maybe the second year was Stun and on.
Okay.
And how I progress, well, for the most part, as you're a junior designer, senior designer, manager, what you're doing is a lot of the same work, but then you're taking on other responsibilities as well. So that's what I did. And the reason that I think that I progressed in the fashion that I did is I would get bored. I get bored easy. I am impatient. I get bored. I always want to be doing something. And so if there was spare moments, I'd go to Greg, my boss at the time, and say, hey, Greg, what don't you want to do? And there was some kind of, business thing that he didn't want to do. And he would say, hey, take a look at this budget, see if we're doing okay. So I'd work on a budget a little bit there. He did the real thing, but I, kind of got to play around. And I got to learn a lot that way. And then back in those days, also, you got to sit in a lot of meetings where management would talk about toys and talk about business and how they relate. And I liked sitting in those meetings and learning about it. And that's how I got to move along. I generally was doing the job that I wanted before I got the job. And that's how most people work at Hasbro. If they want to move up, they have to be 110% on their job and then do more.
More responsibilities.
So that's what I did at Hasbro. And I moved up to manager in G.I. Joe. And then when G.I. Joe moved out to Cincinnati to become Super Joe, G.I. Joe Extreme.
G.I. Joe Extreme.
I stayed in Playskool for about a year, almost a year, I guess. And what was kind of cool is Guy Cassaday and I were in the same team at Playskool, and we got to hang out and still work together. But Tyco called, Tyco Toys, and they said, we need a director of product concepts and design, meaning we do advanced concept stuff, but on their lines. So there might be a brief, there might not, and we come up with ideas, and then it goes over to a development team to develop those products. So that was fun. I mean, that was a blast because you could work on just about anything you wanted. And a lot of it got into the line. I knew Tyco was not doing well at the time when I went there, but it was a boys' job and it sounded like just a lot of fun. So we went down to Jersey. That lasted a short time because Mattel bought Tyco. At that point, they didn't want to have a product concepts group. They wanted people in specific areas. So they set me in charge of Matchbox toys. And that too was a lot of fun. I was always a vehicle guy. I'm not a figure guy. I didn't do any of the figures, although I got to do some weapons and accessories. But yeah, got to play with Matchbox and Matchbox stuff, and got to bring, and because I was I always liked the licenses as well, got to help bring Jurassic Park to Matchbox, which was kind of a coup since Kenner had that license. We said, we're going to just do diecast. And Kenner had failed previously doing diecast in Jurassic Park. So they said, sure, go have at it. We did about $100 million in dinosaurs and little vehicles. We also did RC, a vehicle that popped up and spit water at you. And we did electric race where the dinosaur would come down, grab a car and rip it off the track if you came down near the dinosaur. So we had a lot of fun projects. And then I got called a couple of times from Hasbro saying, hey, you want to come back? And eventually I said, yeah, I've had enough of Mattel. And it's time to go back to Hasbro. And then I got to be director of boys toys for Hasbro Direct. And we worked on 12-inch G.I. Joes, and we worked a lot on 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joes before the main line, decided to bring it back into the main line. Then from there, moved to Boys Toys Regular because they got rid of Hasbro Direct, and got to be a director immediately. Well, senior director there, moved to VP, ran as a VP of Boys Toys for a while, and then left about 8 years ago. And since then, I've been helping out small companies in toys, but mostly working with startups. And I'm co-founders of a couple of startups. We'll see how they do.
Well, good luck. Good luck, Dave.
Thanks.
Say, I notice you're wearing a lot of Cobra.
I always was a Cobra guy.
That's what I was coming to the point I was going to make. I always, of all the designers at Hasbro, I always associated you with Cobra. And you want to go into explaining your affinity for the enemy forces?
Yeah. Again, with design language, what we tried real hard to do is make the G.I. Joes feel, all American, relate to real vehicles that would be in the American Army or American military, but future, a little bit more. Cobra didn't care about rules. They didn't care that they hurt their own guys driving around. So put them in an open cockpit ready to get shot. Who cares? It was more fun just to come up with just crazy stuff. Things that weren't recognizable as what might be in the U.S. military. So yeah, Cobra was always a blast.
So here's another question coming off that. Were there any kind of styling cues that you can think of that you might have carried over from one vehicle to another, or what was like the entire your overall design impression of how you wanted to see Cobra vehicles? Because you did some pretty wacky Cobra vehicles. Some of the more fun designs, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, Cobra, again, we as a team sort of would talk about some of the things that Cobra might do versus G.I. Joe. And I always, and the team always tried to make it, even if you didn't know the vehicle, you'd say, that's a good guy, that's a bad guy. And just
that's what I'm getting at. That's one of the things I'm getting at. Yeah.
So you'll see that where, I'm going to get back. G.I. Joe, it's sort of like these upward swept wings, upward swept things, armor that you might recognize. Where Cobra, downswept wings, darker colors, and then sort of morphic, almost snake-like, could I say, shapes. So yeah, there was definitely a language we tried to hold to that would create that feeling of good guy and bad guy to make it very clear for the kids. There is no gray.
So do you remember some of your vehicles, some of your more classic vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. I can show you what.
Good. This is
Yeah.
good. I love it. Okay.
Yeah, graphics and everything.
Yeah,
cool.
why not? So this was made as a good guy vehicle. You saw a more recognizable shapes going on, and this ended up being what, the Demon? No.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Demon. Sorry if I forget names and stuff, because
I do it all the time.
It was a job and I don't study it. Yeah, so this was the Arctic line. It was supposed to be for G.I. Joe. You can see that it looks like some real shapes. We were asked to change that into a bad guy. And so what I did is I actually angled things more like it was a little bit more evil, a little bit more stealthy, and changed some of the shapes. Also made it able to rise up, so it felt like it was more like an animal. Actually, Marcia Mole had made that suggestion, and yeah, I dug it, and it was easy enough to do. So
there it is, right there in all its glory.
all right.
So I do have a quick question from somebody. You're talking about colors and snakes. So I have a special guest that has a quick question for you. So give me a moment.
Hey, Noah.
Hey, Noah. How are you?
Good.
All right,
Ask,
so
ask Dave
So
your
we're-
question.
Why did you make the mamba purple and not blue?
It's an excellent question because the original drawing that you probably saw was blue. Quite often what happened is we as a committee would decide what committee, meaning all the people that are involved with G.I. Joe, would get together and make sure that we had different colors for different things. And something probably was blue that was coming out, and so we chose purple. But we would always make lots and lots of different colors and then choose amongst them. But yeah, it ended up purple. You can make yours blue if you choose to. Just tell your dad you're going to paint it.
there you go.
One of the
Thank you,
things that
Mom.
I used to say when a color didn't come out the way I wanted it to is I'd say, mine's going to be that color. And it was, because I'd paint it.
There you go. We'll color it, okay? All right, say thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Noah. It's a great question. Thanks, Dave, for answering. His favorite color is blue. So when he saw it,
Mine too.
he's like, why did it go from blue? So it's makes sense though. Makes sense. Kirk, did you want to read off our first fan question?
Sure. We have a question from Eric Amon, and he wants to know were some of your sources of inspiration, whether they were ones that you intentionally sought out or not, when conceiving or working on a concept. Were there any sources of inspiration for any of your designs that were unusual or even unexpected?
Yes. There were the usual ones, which we went to military shows. We went to the Association of U.S. Army show, where we got to see all the new armament, all the new equipment, weapons. We also got to go to Natick Labs, where uniforms were created and tested. We also went to, we went to proving grounds.
Aberdeen Proving Grounds.
Aerospace Museum, right?
Air and Space Museum, where I got, image. This is where the shuttle first started its look. It's from the Air and Space Museum, and that's one of the images that I saw. Here's a couple of shots of stuff that we did, from shooting real weapons, visiting the Air Force. I got to ride in a tank as well as a bridge layer. Got to go and hang out with monster trucks. It was pretty cool getting those kinds of experiences. One of the ones that sort of stands out as the most obscure is from the shuttle, the original space shuttle drawing. And the shuttle itself, the shapes came from, the basic wedge was there, but I wanted to get some curves. I wanted some real nice forms. And Guy Cassaday, who was into bodybuilding, had this bodybuilding magazine that had a woman on the front of it, and she was lifting weights, and it just showed her back, and it was just the sculpt of the back of her, I don't know what they're called, the bone sticking up on your back, and then her backbone was sticking up further than I had been used to, but the forms of those really came about, and I started working in clay, trying to recreate that image. And that's what you see on the round and then the spine of the space shuttle. So that's probably the most obscure piece of reference I can remember.
So there can be a lot of obstacles involved when being a creative professional. What has been your biggest challenge and how did you overcome it?
Okay, so the biggest challenge at being a creative professional generally was time. So in the earlier days when I was on the board and building stuff, time was always the battle. So that was always a challenge, and then hitting costs, making sure that something goes out for the right price, makes the right amount of money for the company, and if you make money for the company, you get to keep your job. It's a really nice thing. Yeah, those were the biggest challenges, and then of course we had. Later on, when I became a director and moved up, the hardest thing is, and I think Vinny actually touched on it, is you have to learn to let the designers design and try to like what they're doing. So at first I became a little bit too hands-on and had to step back and say, yep, you do it. Because if you step in too much, if you step in, designers are going to use you for a crutch and they won't be as creative as they can be. So you try to, as a manager, you try to give them a field to hunt in and then just say, go out and shoot something. And hopefully they come back with good game. So the hardest thing was just stepping back and letting other people do what you wanted to do. That's always a challenge. And I think Vinny said the same thing in the last meeting.
And I mean, and you kind of bring up some good points with cost and time. I mean, as any company, that's important aspects, you know, whatever it is, whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where you are. That's it.
So can you talk about the pressures of the toy industry itself and kind of the seasonal effect of it all? And
what pressure? No, it's year round. You know, you're always working towards Christmas, but it's year round. There used to be about a month or two that we would slow down a little bit in the summer and try to do some experimentation and just a lot of little things. That went away pretty quickly as the workforce got cut down. Throughout my career, there were lots and lots of layoffs. Sad to say, lost a lot of good friends through layoffs. It was just the way it is, I guess. So as those, you know, the personnel got cut, you ended up having more and more work. I can't tell you a funny story about a really painful summer that I had tons and tons of work. Had to work way overtime, and that was one of the designers had done something that was questionable, and he knows what we're talking about.
yeah.
And he was told he was going to be, there was something going to happen to him, but they didn't know, but he had to leave the building, and he may or may not come back. So there was about a month and a half where this guy wasn't in the building. Now, they didn't hire somebody, so somebody had to take on his work. So he was sitting on the beach, not getting paid, but sitting on the beach, hanging out, and I got to take over all his work. That was a painful summer, I'd say.
And do you still give him crap about it today?
You just heard it.
Okay.
So Dave, one of the questions that I wrote down, not on the question sheet, but I just kind of thought of it just a little while ago before we came on is, what was the vehicle that was the most difficult to design? I hate to just spring it on you, but you know, I'm sure there had to be, you know.
I'm gonna go to the shuttle a lot on favorite vehicles, and you know, but the shuttle was hard, and the reason it was hard was I had done initial design after coming back from a show. There was a question on if we should do shuttles or not, but you know, it was in the news a lot. I was pretty hot on it. I showed it to Steve Reese. He went home and he made the whole gantry system underneath it. Amazing, amazing work. And he wasn't supposed to be on the board. He just went home and did it because he was passionate about it. Brought it in, we did present it. Maybe we presented it to you.
No,
No.
I was over in Playskool at the time.
You were in Playskool at the time? Okay. I don't remember who we presented it to, but they said, we love it, we want to do it. But you realize it has to be a Christmas item. It has to ship up by X date. And in terms of normal schedule, this wouldn't be, because this is huge. And it came back to us and said, well, we can put it off to another year, or we can do it for Christmas and kill ourselves doing it. Knowing the toy industry, if you put something off for a year, quite often it disappears. It never comes back. Something gets replaced because it gets boring because everybody's looking at it and think that it's already out there. So we as a group said, all right, we're going to tackle this. And what normally would have taken, I don't know, like 3 months to build, you know, from design to building all the models and to getting it into production, it would take a long time. We did it in an amazingly short amount of time, but I was told to keep my hours because somehow I was going to be compensated for those hours. And I was clocking 80-hour weeks. It was tough. We were there on the weekends. It was fun. We were getting.
That was. I remember that summer. I
Yeah,
remember that summer.
You helped
because
build it.
I helped build a portion of that shuttle myself.
That's right. We pulled in anybody that had a pair of hands that could build a model.
So no, I wasn't there at the beginning. I was there at the building, and then I came back on the brand for when we went into production on it. So I did all the VSP and FEPs on the shuttle.
Yeah. So
That's an amazing image you have behind you of that blueprint of the shuttle. That's amazing.
yeah, the engineering drawings matched so well. And if you look in, if you have a shuttle and if you look behind the passenger seat, or what would be the passenger seat,
Yeah.
you'll find a rat. And it's even in this drawing. The engineer decided he was going to put his little mark. So there's a rat on board the shuttle.
A little stowaway.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of Easter eggs within that, aren't there?
There are more. If you look at the, you'll be able to find something if you look at the lines, the wiring, but I'm not going to tell you.
And that's always fun when you guys had those hidden messages, whether it be Easter eggs actually on the product or within stickers or decals, right? You know, I know there's a lot of stories that I shared within the book series, you know, birthdays or important dates and stuff like that. So it's always, that just I think speaks volumes as far as how much fun you guys were having, and just, you know, making it personalized to a certain extent and just going with it. So
right. And you know, on the shuttle, my wife Joanne, who I called JoJo at the time, you'll notice that it's 1010, and the 1 has a very long serif, if that's the right word, and that's because if you look at backwards in the mirror, it says JoJo.
it's awesome.
So got to get little things into there. As well as on the Mamba is, I think, our first date or something to that effect. I don't know, some date.
Now at HasCon, I know we came across an image of a traditional looking shuttle. Was there ever, I don't remember who designed it. I don't know if it's Steve or somebody else, but was there some debate going back and forth with like a traditional looking shuttle like the Challenger at the time?
Yeah, that was way earlier, and I'm not sure. That drawing that I saw was probably the first time I saw it.
Okay.
And it's very traditional looking, and I don't know if one of our designers designed it or somebody else handed it in. But yeah, it showed up. But no, I don't remember it ever talked about.
Going that route.
Yeah. So there's one other thing that I would say was a challenge. When Bill Young was working on the stealth jet, he wanted landing gear to be a specific way, where the front would fold in and the other 2 wing wheels would fold in sideways. And he wanted one mechanism that would do it. And we handed it to the engineer. Engineer said, well, that can't be done. So Bill said, can that be done to me? And I said, sure. He goes, will you do it? I said, sure. And so I got to build his landing gear, and basically created a whole, I don't know, big piece inside that if you slide the back piece, yeah, it all works the way that Bill wanted it. But I was told was impossible, and don't tell me something's impossible. It just motivates me. Or maybe that was on purpose. I don't know.
And Kirk, you were there for that, right? For the stealth,
Oh, yeah.
of course. Yeah.
Oh, another funny one about Kirk. We were going to do a Destro vehicle, and he said, anything but flying. and it has to be super inexpensive. And so, let's get out of the way. I made a walker, and it had wheels in all the corners so it could roll, but that was the plan. And showed that, and everybody looked at it and goes, you know what? It's kind of cool, but shouldn't it be flying? I'm like, oh no, I don't have any time to do it. So I just stuck wings on that thing that I had already built. And that's how the spoiler ended up being the way it was.
Never one to waste the good drawing.
That's right.
Just take some white out and add wings.
That's right. That's exactly. And you know, the same sort of thing happened with the bug, where it started with, you know, one bubble, and then the price was supposed to go up. So I created a, you know, I just sort of duplicated on Xerox machine, and so it was a 2-bubble unit. And then everybody liked that and thought that it should be the high-priced item, and that's how the bug ended up being even bigger.
I think I've shared with you before, like as a kid, you know, the Demon and Destra's Spoiler were some of my favorites because I liked how, you know, the Demon can go up and down, of course, and then you could also attach Destro on top of it, you know, kind of make it a whole combined type of vehicle, you know,
Right.
2-for-1 type of deal. So it's always been one of my favorites as a kid.
Yeah, anytime we could get extra play value in for free, that's huge. Anytime I could sneak detail or play value in, and it didn't cost anything significant, that was big. And because we weren't painting anything in vehicles, we had to put a lot of detail because the shades and shadows gave it a feel of a lot more. You were getting a lot more for your money. Because there was no color variations, and we had to limit the amounts of plastic we could do. So tons and tons of detail was real important. So a lot of what we called tchotch on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that has always been unique about G.I. Joe was the amount of detail, especially in the vehicle side. I mean, just all the little mechanisms, you know, even the cockpits, and seeing all the stuff there was amazing. So
yeah. Well, and a lot of that came from hand building. Most of the other companies were, designer was drawing some pictures and handing it off. And because we were building our own models at the time, we could design as we go. And then when we did start to draw and hand it off to model makers that were in-house, they understood that language and they got to be the designers. And we told them to. In fact, I used to draw Escher-like things in my drawings, where a circle would actually be a square on the other end, and you know, things twisted that couldn't actually be made. And I'd put them in my drawings because I wanted the 3D designers to do design and create what they wanted in those areas. And so Chuck Ruffino would come to me and go, "I found it. I know what you're talking about right here. That can't be done. You drew it." Like, yeah, drawings lie.
And I know you are one who has shared with me, you always enjoyed working with your hands more than you did having to do it, you know, do it on paper, which many of you guys did. You know, building the models, kit bashing, stuff like that was something you always enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, no, I liked both, but you know, there were other guys that could render around way better than I could. I could build stuff. I could make stuff. So every part of these models that you look at are hand built. I mean, it's little pieces of plastic stuck to another little piece of plastic to make whatever it is that's there. And it's, for many people, it's hard to believe that, oh, that you didn't do that in the computer. Yeah, we didn't.
No one even knew what cat was at that time.
Right.
So Dave, before I go, because I'm looking at my clock and I've got to head out of here to pick my wife up. I got a final question for you.
Okay.
Dan kind of put these questions together, and I kind of looked at them, and the one question I'd like to ask is what do you think separates G.I. Joe when you think back on the G.I. Joe toy line and the toy brand?
What separates G.I. Joe from all other action figure lines?
It was a special time. You know, a toy hits a certain time and a certain feeling. It was a special time for that particular toy. It also somehow, there was a gang of people, and this is just a few, that just, here we go, just hit it off as friends and coworkers. And we just hung out and played off of each other.
I say that all the time, and people look at me amazed. I said, you know, for me, it was never like going to work. It was like I was going to a playtime. I was going to see people I respected and people I could play with all day.
That's exactly it. There was not criticism. There was a lot of friendly critique. We worked on each other's projects and didn't have a problem with that. There was, you know, there was camaraderie. I would say that, you know, all the models that I built had somebody's hand on it in some fashion. You know, if somebody had a better idea, you incorporated it, because why not? Like I said, I helped Bill with some landing gear. He helped me, you know, draw all sorts of stuff. Ron would help me with some figure stuff to make my drawings look better. It was nonstop. You know, Thrasher was one of the figures I got to be early on when Ron came to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to make you a dreadnought because you're bad." And he says, "What do you want to be dressed in?" I said, I want lacrosse gear." He said, "Okay, and what's his weapon?" I said, "Lacrosse stick mace." And so I got to actually build the lacrosse stick mace, and he put spikes on lacrosse gear, and then he, of course, he gave me a green streak in my hair. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was friendly, and a lot of ribbing, a lot of mischief was happening as well. But yeah, in a good-natured way. But
That's
yeah,
good. That's good.
that was very special about many of the GI Joe years, all the
Yeah,
GI Joe years up until
well,
'94.
you echo pretty much what I felt working on that brand, and with all the people that we got to work together with.
Yeah,
You know, we're long overdue for a lunch and or a coffee, and you know,
that
we
would be
got to do that soon.
incredible. Yeah, yeah.
All right, I got to run.
All right. Well, thank you,
Thanks.
Kirk.
Great to see you.
Good seeing you, Dave.
All right.
All right, take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks,
I'll
Kirk.
let you finish up.
So kind of building off what you just said about Thrasher, yeah, I written down a question. I think, to my recollection, you're the only person, I mean, we know of several people who worked on the brand who were made into characters. I think you're one of the few that was made at least into two with Ozone. Was that you again on Frostbite there as well?
It didn't happen.
No.
And then
No.
there was another figure that was proposed. It was a firefighter, or maybe that was an early Ozone. I'm not sure.
So talk about that. You talked a little bit about Ron and how he brought you into it. Kurt Groen, I know, did, I think, at least the Ozone, and then Frostbite. I'm not sure if that's Dave DeForge. Is that who would have done that, probably, or I can't remember.
Don't know.
Or that may have been Doug Hart who brought you on for the painting.
Yeah, I think that was Doug Hart. I'm not sure that ended up in anything.
No, it was part of the Frostbite was part of the canceled Battle of Core Rangers line.
There we go. Yeah.
So
I could have been somebody. I don't know. By the way, I was also sculpted as a Star Wars driver at one point, but that's
oh,
okay. I don't know. I was hanging around. They saw my face. You know, why not do David? I don't know.
Didn't know if, you know, we talked to Vinny, as you saw, about him being cesspool and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I didn't know.
Yeah, he didn't tell you the whole story. We're both from Newton, Massachusetts, by the way. And my story had Newton, Massachusetts. That's where Ozone was from. And we definitely picked him, and I definitely talked to Kirk about the big scar. You know, we had fun with that. And then showed Vinny, and he goes, "Well, Kunitz, you're going to be from 3 Mile Island, I'm taking Newton. And
That's
so
funny.
he stole my hometown from me,
Still your hometown from you?
and he put me in 3 Mile Island, and he thought that was very
Nice.
funny because he had
That is-
control over that area, and we had control over the looks.
Okay. It's a good balance amongst everybody, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, and you know, you talked earlier about, you know, challenges. I wouldn't call it a challenge at all. We had heated discussion with our marketing group at times about how we in design felt things should be done and what they felt was proper for the market. But the beauty was, after we got through these heated discussions, I should say, we'd go out for a beer. We'd go and hang out. It was the only reason that we were as heated as we were is we were all passionate about the brand, and you knew it came from a good place. It wasn't nasty. It was all a good place, and it was because you cared. So who could blame you for that?
Exactly. And I think that's, you know, one of the things, and I'm glad Kirk asked that question, and you guys have the same type of feelings as far as the people you worked with. You know,
Oh,
it was the passion. I mean, people ask me, you know, why G.I. Joe and why, you know, why focus on the book series and all these things. And I'm like, it truly was a team. You know, the inspiration behind the whole book series was just recognizing the team effort, because it wasn't just a few people. You know, it really truly was a team effort. And, you know, when people ask me about what makes G.I. Joe special, I mean, it really comes down to the passion that you guys had. You know, for very few have I ever learned, like when I've interviewed people, very few have just said it's just a job. You know, it's more than a job for many, because the friendships created, you know, there's a job aspect of it, of course, but the friendships that were created, the fun that you guys had, all the outside things that you guys did outside of work, just having, you know, I've heard of the rocket competitions and stuff like that. So
Launch.
launch, is that what it's called?
That's what we called it.
So I have a question from Steve Blackburn. He asked, what was a design that you really wanted to see made that didn't make the cut?
The Scrambler I really liked. Did you feature that at all?
I don't think I
One of the
have. Which one is that?
It's an airplane, and it had a spinning prop in it. It was done later, kind of, as there was a spinning prop in the center of it. Came out.
Was it the Vortex? Was it the one Vinny talked about?
Yeah, it came out as the Vortex by somebody else, but I liked my Scrambler better. I built it almost all the way, and it got killed.
Oh, okay.
And then the other one was in the final line, and it was a big, powerful battle tank that had a motorized launching cannon, and that worked so well. It was a lot of fun, and I believe because it was shooting foam missiles, that's how they saw that. The Cincinnati team saw that, and I believe that's why they made everything launch foam missiles, which I don't believe in. I don't believe that any action figure should have the same feature in all of its characters or all of its vehicles. It doesn't give the kid anything to ask for.
Now, was it a brand new looking tank, or was there a base on previous used tanks? Because I've seen a prototype of something where
It was
the
brand
Mauler
new.
was the base, but it had a different mechanism on top.
Yeah, it was brand new,
Brand new. Okay.
and it had a spinning wheel that would shoot the missiles out at high velocity. Multi-fire.
I'm sure parents would have loved that one.
Oh yeah,
For sure.
yeah. It probably would not have been the best toy because G.I. Joe generally was played within, you know, like a 4 foot around a kid. When a missile got too far, they would give up shooting the missiles quite often.
Yeah. Now, did you, I just thought about this, you know, I mean, you were there for the transition when Stephen had passed away.
Yes.
And, you know, and you had that transition from weapons do not shoot. You know, when you first started at Hasbro and Namamba and all those, you know, you had your little, you know, mechanisms that let the bombs drop and everything.
Yeah.
When you went to, you know, the 90s and past the 90s, when you were able to do these type of mechanisms and shooting styrofoam missiles and stuff. When that change occurred, was it a challenge to now start adding those mechanisms, or was it like kind of finally like, yeah, we get to do, have some more fun with this stuff and add these types of mechanisms in these
I wanted shooting weapons for ages, and we sort of cheated with a finger flick and all that, but yeah, no, I wanted shooting weapons, and there was a toy line that came out. Competitor had a launching missiles, and we brought it in front of our management, and they said, hey, our competitors are doing this. We have to stay competitive. This could be big. We want to put launching missiles on our stuff. And they said, okay. Through just a bunch of discussion, but then,
yeah.
Okay. And what I actually did is I took one of this competitor's toys. Actually, I bought a bunch of them, and I milled off all their detail, stuck on detail, and put it on our vehicles where they would fit. And those were the first launching mechanisms, is actually our competitors.
I think that happened often, where I think Kirk shared that too.
Oh,
with,
yeah.
Taking competition, like I think for the Sky Striker or something, it was like a Revell or model that they took the cockpit or did something to it. They modified it a little bit, but you could tell it was theirs originally.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you took parts wherever you could. You modified them so that you could own them, but yeah. And then the launching system that I had taken from the competitor had 2 springs in it, one for the trigger and one to launch the missile. And one of our engineers figured out how to use one spring to do both. So
okay.
there was an advancement on the inside anyway.
And it makes now it's under you guys, so it makes sense.
Yeah. And then that exploded literally. We got to do all sorts of different kinds of shooting things. The battle wagon was a ton of fun. It launched multiple missiles.
Yeah, I know that's a favorite of yours, and I think Greg talked a little bit about it as well. That vehicle, because it had a lot going for it with the shooting mechanisms and then being motorized, and it's a complicated vehicle.
Yeah,
so.
And that mechanism that made it motorized was just, it was bulletproof. It was so good. I used that mechanism for all sorts of different non-toy things because it was just a great gear train.
Do you remember who did that or worked on that?
I want to say Ted Keska, an engineer, who's no longer with us.
Okay. So I have 2 final questions, but before we do so, I'm looking in your background and I see some 12-inch Joes. I was wondering, or 12-inch characters. I was wondering who they are, and you can get them up close, possibly.
Well, the most interesting one would be President Clinton. Alan was going to a meeting with him, and so we created some heads, probably like 3 or 4 heads, and I got to have one of them, so I painted it up, and yeah, got to have it.
Created that model. Yeah, I've seen unpainted ones. So
yeah, Alan Hassenfeld.
Oh wow, I think that as well. Did you paint that yourself then?
Let me see if I painted this one. If it's not that great, it would be me. Yeah, I painted this one.
Okay.
Sergeant Rock, who I'm a fan of.
Okay.
Who wouldn't be? And a couple of those old Joes. Let's see. What else? Anything interesting? Oh, a project I'm working on more recently.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about what if you want or if you can, what you're working on now.
Yeah, we're looking to scan people and then create little minifigures for them. That's the basic plan, and we can go further into it later.
You said you never do figures, so where's the vehicles now?
Oh, I'm doing all figures right now.
And I don't know what room you're in, but it's awesome that you have that on display in your house. not tucked away or in boxes and stuff like that. You know, all your stuff is out and about.
Yeah, no, Joanne and I both collect toys, just odds and ends. You'll see many of the ones up here are hers. Some of them are mine.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a lot of action figures as a kid, almost none. But one of them that I did have was Major Matt Mason, my
wow.
favorite, because I was into the space race at the time.
So and I'm sure that drew a lot into your passion for the Defiant. And I believe there was another vehicle you made that was never produced, right? I believe.
Yes.
Is space concept. I mean, not the stiletto, but something else is more like Joe related.
Yeah, actually, there were. I tried to get into space probably 2 or 3 other times.
And you're ahead of your time. I mean, look what's going on in the world today. Here's Space Force.
I know.
So, I mean, you guys were all ahead of your time. In closing, I have 2 questions. Who do you view as a great leader over the span of your career? How did they influence you? And if you could say, you know, a statement about them, what would it be?
Well, Mr. Brazigian was definitely inspirational in a lot of things that I did. So he was fantastic. He encouraged us. He challenged us. So he was big. Greg Burnson was probably, you know, he was my director, and I learned just a ton from him. And we had our heated discussions too, but major influence on how I ended up doing my director jobs later on. Mm-hmm. It influenced me significantly. And then, I don't know, every team member had their little bits and pieces that have become part of me. You know, and those all helped me grow. It was a very influential part of my life, the Joe years. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are the work influences. Tom David, my professor at Purdue, huge influence. He was a wonderful bastard. He was just mean to us at times, but man, did he push us. And then can't leave out my father, who said, "Hey, what's the worst that could happen?" But yeah, those I would say are the major influences in terms of my work.
Mm-hmm. And as far as, you know, things that have influenced you since then, what are some things that you've taken away from Hasbro, Mattel, or just, you know, working on Joe that you've taken and now have incorporated into things you're working on today, or, you know, have ideas that work down the road on?
I mean, everything's been a stepping stone, and everything you do in life is going to teach you. I was always told, you either win or learn. So, you know, there is no losing. So every piece of it has taught me a bit. Every person I've run into, I steal from. Tom David, my professor, used to say, lie, cheat, steal. If you take from things that you need to and make them your own. So I would say that, you know, all the different people that I've run into are influences, and I take little bits and pieces of them, you know, the good and the bad, mm-hmm. Whether it's good or bad.
And, you know, I think that's true. Even in my industry, you know, I have a new person that just started recently, and, you know, I was telling her today, I'm like, it's okay to steal ideas and steal, you know, things that you can get from your peers. I mean, that's how you learn. And so, I think you hit it right on the head there. So again, I wanted to thank you again for coming on with us. You know, it's been great learning from you, and hopefully, you know, we'll have you on again and get to talk more, and who knows, maybe we'll have even more people. I'd love to do maybe some type of reunion with maybe the group at some point. All the design R&D guys, and I think it'd be fun to kind of have a little Zoom call with everybody. But
that would be fun. I'm sure we'd be talking over each other a lot. But
oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it'd be total chaos.
But yeah,
But,
That would be a good time.
but
And
again,
thank you for keeping it all alive. It's been a blast.
it has, and I mean, I thank you to you as well, not only for this podcast, but and coming on, but all the years of support, all the information you've provided, all the questions I've bugged you with. You never fretted in answering them, and never had issues with sharing. And like I said, I love hearing all the insight and sharing that out with the public, because I think it just, again, it shows that passion that you and many others had and still have. I mean, look at you wearing G.I. Joe and Cobra right now. I mean, so to this day.
By the way, this is not unusual. I got a lot of free clothes.
Hey, at least they still fit, right, from back then, so that's good.
That's right.
But, well, thank you again. I appreciate it, and we hope to have you on soon someday.
All right. Thanks again. Bye, Dan.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show. And as always, remember, the toys are out there.
Special thanks to Sean Berg, aka Word Burglar, for the great introduction music for the podcast. If you'd like to hear more of his music or check out his new album, Spaceverse, check out his website, www.wordburglar.com, or on Facebook at Word Burglar. Also, if you'd like to learn more about the history of G.I. Joe and see never-before-seen designs and concepts, please check out my book series at www.creatinggijoe.com, or find me on Facebook at 3 3/4 inch Joe.